I sleep light out here. The wind is a door that never quite closes, and a horse shifting in the corral kicks me awake. Most mornings I'm up before the sun chooses a color. Coffee on the stove, boots by the door, hat on a peg. The quiet asks. Nothing. Work lays out the same fences to walk, a pump that sulks till you coax it, salt for the cattle, a hinge that complains. The prairie talks for everyone. Grass hissing, meadowlarks punching holes in the silence, rope whispering as I coil it. A man can go a long time without hearing his name. After a while, even that feels like mercy. I stepped onto the porch with my tin mug. Thunder, my old gelding, pushed his nose through the rail for a sniff of the morning. Everything where it ought to be. Then I saw her. She stood beyond the water trough, 20 paces off, still as a fence post. Hair braided tight, dress. Dusty, a blanket folded over one arm. Not fear still dash, decision dash, still dot Apache, by the beadwork at her throat. The day tipped. Visitors out here ride loud and spit to prove the ground belongs to them. This woman didn't move. The sun climbed enough to touch her eyes, dark, watchful. Waiting dot, my first thought was practical. What had I left undone? Gates? Guns? Had someone followed the tracks I put down last night when I carried a boy to the creek and washed the blood from his hair? I hadn't told a soul. The mug felt heavier. I set it on the rail. Every hungry, foolish part of me that had slept in the barn of my chest woke and began to pace. Solitude is a clean room until a footprint appears on the floorboards. Then it's, "Oh, you see, morning," I said. My voice sounded like it had been kept in a saddlebag too long. She didn't answer, but something in her face eased. The smallest breath let go. I stepped into the yard. Dust was cool with stingy dew. Thunder snorted, the way he does when a snake thinks about being a rope. No rifle in her hands. No knife I could see, but I knew better than to call anyone unarmed just because I couldn't count the iron. You? Lost? I asked, a slow shake of her head. Hungry? A pause, then half a nod. Old rules rose, keep your distance, keep your pace, keep your heart fenced. They've kept me breathing. They've also kept the house so quiet I can hear my own pulse. Maybe it was the creek water turning pale with the boy's blood. Maybe it was how her shoulders squared like she had chosen this ground. Maybe it was just the wind changing its tune and making a fool of me. Come sit, I said, nodding at the porch. Coffee's hot. Her eyes followed the nod, then came. Back to me, measuring. I let her. I stepped onto the boards so she wouldn't have to approach without seeing my hands. I raised them, empty. The floor answered with a creak. She moved at last. The blanket stayed folded. She walked like the land belonged to her, and she was borrowing it to reach my steps. When she set a foot on the first board, the morning leaned. I poured a second tin cup, careful with noise. I didn't know her name or her reason. I only knew the wind had stopped feeling like an answer and started feeling like a question, and I had just invited it to sit and stay a while. She didn't drink at first. She just cupped the tin with both hands, letting the steam curl against her face like it was something to breathe instead of swallow. Her eyes flicked over the yard, the barn door, the sagging fence line. She was marking my life, one piece at a time, without moving more than her thumb along the rim of that cup. I leaned against the post and tried not to fidget. I'd spent half my life with nothing but the creak of leather and the snort of horses for company, and somehow her silence was louder than any of it. Finally, she raised the cup and took a sip. Her lips pressed to the tin like she knew the weight of such a thing, accepting a man's drink, sharing breath with him in the dawn. The swallow was slow, careful. Then she spoke. A voice low, not fragile, but measured, as though each word cost her. "I am yours. For saving my brother." The words slid into the boards under my boots. For a second I thought I'd heard wrong. I shifted, straightened, felt the hair on my arms lift. "Your brother?" Her eyes found mine, steady. "Last night, by the creek." The image came hard and fast. The boy, no older than 16, slumped across my saddle, blood streaking his side, his breath ragged. I'd found him crumpled near the mesquite, his horse long gone. I hadn't thought twice. I hauled him to the water, pressed rags to the wound, and prayed he'd keep hold of the thread of life until dawn. I never asked who he was. Just did. What any man with a pulse ought to. I hadn't expected this. You don't owe me, I said, voice rougher than I meant. I did what was right. Her mouth pulled into something not quite a smile, not quite sadness. You saved him. In our way, a life is not left unanswered. She set the cup down, careful, and folded her hands in her lap. So I am here. For you. I stared at her, throat dry as the high plains. Women don't just appear at a man's gate with vows wrapped in silence. I wanted to laugh, to tell her she was mistaken, to demand she leave before the weight of it sank me. But I couldn't, because something in her eyes held like the storm sky before lightning, alive with promise and threat, both dot my chest tightened. Not with fear, not exactly. More like a hand I hadn't known was missing had just pressed against my heart. I drew a breath, slow. Then you can stay. For now. Her head inclined the barest fraction, as if that was all the answer needed. We sat on the porch, two strangers. Bound by a creek's mercy, the sound of coffee cooling between us. The prairie had always been wide, endless, empty. But that morning it felt crowded with her words, her vow, and the question of what I'd just let walk into my life. We didn't speak for a while. Sun climbed, laying bright rectangles on the porch boards and warming the tin cups. Her words kept turning in me, rearranging furniture I'd nailed down years ago. Names are anchors out here. You burn them into wood and scratch them on canteens so the land can spit them back. I realized I hadn't asked hers. What do I call you? I said, soft enough not to spook the moment. She watched me as if the answer had to travel far to reach. Her mouth. Aayoka, she said at last, each syllable set careful, like beads in a pattern you don't want to break. I let it run through me. Aayoka. The sound had weight, a river stone kind that keeps heat after sundown. I said it once to be sure, then again because the word tasted like the truth I hadn't known I was thirsty for. Something in her face eased. Her gaze drifted over the corral, the pump, the wash line. Not prying learning. I did the same. The small scar near her temple, the mended edge of her blanket, the faint scent of juniper smoke in her hair. Questions pressed at me. Who hurt your brother? Who sent you? What does yours mean? Will you vanish when he walks into my yard? But a tug in my chest warned me to let the creek clear before I stepped in and muddied it. So I listened to what wasn't said. The quiet between us wasn't empty anymore. It had shape. If I leaned wrong, I'd bruise it. She set the cup by her boot. A bead on her moccasin sparked and went to sleep. She folded her hands and watched the line where shadow met light across the yard. My mother, she said finally, chose my name for seeing beyond. She touched her chest, then the space between us. Beyond first look, I nodded and found I understood. Most folks look once and decide how a man will fit in their mouths when they talk about him. She looked twice, maybe 3 times. It steadied and unsteadied me both. I'm Luke, I said, though she'd know from the brand. On my gate. Saying it felt like returning a coin you've been loaned necessary and fair. She tried it. Luke. In her mouth the word turned lean and true. I had the quick, foolish thought my name had been waiting to be said that way. When the sun reached the rail, I stood. Chores won't do themselves, I said. You're welcome to rest. There's bread inside, jerky on the peg, water in the blue crock. Her eyes came back to me. A small nod, a yes I felt more than saw. I waited for the urge to ask how long. Why me? What now? It didn't come. The question that did was simpler. Will you tell me if you need anything, Aayoka? She breathed like land after rain. I will. I stepped off the porch. Gravel crunched. The day smelled of rope, iron, and sage. Behind me, the boards sighed as she shifted. I thought of putting a frame around whatever we were starting, then let silence hold it. Some things grow better when a man doesn't stand over them. Naming the inches. At the gate, I glanced back. She'd turned her face into the wind, eyes half-lidded, as if listening to a song I couldn't hear. I said her name once more under my breath, like a brand I dared to carry where no one could see it. Aayoka. Then I went to work. The days began to bend in ways I hadn't expected. At first I thought she might linger only a night or two, then be gone like dust, carried off in a strong wind. But morning kept following morning, and Aayoka was still there, quiet as shadow, but steady as the sun. She didn't wait for me to ask. She worked. By the second day she was hauling buckets from the pump, skirts tucked, arms corded with strength that didn't match her size. I found her spreading hay in the corral, humming under her breath, the horses shifting toward her like they'd known her longer than I had. The hum was what caught me. A tune not meant for ears like mine, words strung in a language I couldn't shape with my tongue. The sound carried across the yard like a thread, binding everything it touched. I caught myself standing still, just to let it wind around me. She moved with grace I'd only ever seen in storms or rivers. Quick, sure, unhurried, yet impossible to stop. Watching her set a saddle or rake a stall, it felt less like she was learning the ranch and more like the ranch had been waiting for her at supper. She took only what she needed, leaving the rest for me, as though I mattered more than she did. She patched the tear in my work shirt with the same needle she used on her own blanket, humming that tune again, low and steady. When I tried to thank her, the word dried up. Loneliness had always been a straight road and my chest flat, long, no turns. Suddenly I was walking a trail I didn't recognize. Every hum, every look she gave the horses, every step she took across my porch, it bent the line. One evening, I stood by the corral, hands on the rail, and realized the place felt different. Not fuller, exactly, warmer, as if the boards themselves had leaned closer to hear her song. For the first time in years, my own silence didn't feel heavy. It felt shared. Still. Unease crawled under my ribs. A man alone learns not to need. Need turns to loss too easy. Yet here was this woman, weaving herself into my days with nothing more than a hum and a steady hand. I told myself it was nothing, just the echo of her vow, the aftertaste of gratitude. But deep down I knew better. She was changing the air, breathed, and I was letting her. That night, when I banked the fire and set my hat on the peg, I caught myself listening for the sound of her breathing in the other room. And when I heard it soft, even I felt something in me unclench, something that had been locked for longer than I cared to count. I held my questions until the sky decided to speak for me. That evening the sun went down slow and wide, copper pouring over the pasture until every blade of grass looked forged. We ate on the porch, plates on our knees, the skillet snapping softly as it cooled. The wind carried a faint smell of mesquite smoke from someplace far enough away to be memory. I'd rehearsed half a dozen ways to ask, and none of them fit. So I took the plain trail. Why stay here, Aayoka? She didn't answer right off. She watched the light recede along the top rail, as if words needed a road to walk on. Then she turned, and for the first time I felt the full weight of her. Looking, not measuring, placing. A man who saves family, she said, deserves family in return. The line settled between us like a blanket laid careful. I felt something old and tight inside me pull loose, the way a stubborn knot sighs when the right hand touches it. I don't ask for payment, I said, because the mouth wants to protest when the heart is already moving. It is not payment. She set her plate beside her boot and touched her chest with 2 fingers, then the space between us. It is returning what was kept from the dark. Debt is for horses and rifles. Family is given back. The word family knocked around my ribs like a colt testing a corral. I had once counted chairs for noise that would never fill them again. Winter has long hands. It took what it wanted and left me with quiet that remembered names. I'd made peace with it the way a man makes peace with a scar by learning not to touch it. What is his name? I asked. Talakai, she said, and the way she said it told me that if I had failed at the creek, that name would have become a stone she carried forever. He breathes, he wakes, he will mend. A pause. I came because my feet knew thee. Way to the man who held my brother to the sun and told him to live. A laugh snuck out of me small, rusted. I told him no such poetry. I said, "Stay with me, boy," and cursed the way a man does when he's losing ground. Then he heard your cursing. Aayoka's mouth tilted, a near smile that felt like firelight. It worked. We let quiet sit with us again. Coyotes yawned the first notes of night someplace beyond the east fence. The stars began their old business. She reached into her blanket and lifted a narrow strip of woven wool, colors set like a dusk sky. She tied it to the porch rail with a patient knot, her fingers certain. "In my family," she said, "we mark places that keep breath. It means this house remembers us." My throat went tight. I didn't have words for the way that touched every empty hallway in me. So I did what a rancher does when a thing is decided. I made room for it. "There's a second hook by the door," I said. "Been empty as long as I can remember. For your blanket, if you want it there." She looked at the peg, as if it were a question she had already answered. "I will use it," she said. The night came on like a promise. I stacked our plates, stood, and the boards knocked once under my heel. When I set the skillet inside and came back out, she was still watching the rail where her knot held. I took off my hat and felt the cool of dark on my scalp. "I can't tell you what tomorrow carries," I said, voice low. "But if you mean what you said, I'll not make light of it. I mean it." She touched the knot. "Family returns." I nodded because anything more would have broken me open. Somewhere beyond the pasture, an owl called twice. I sat back down, close enough to feel the heat still coming off the iron, close enough to know I was not alone in it. The shift came gentle, like rain sliding into dry ground. At first it was a word here, a glance there, a pause when we worked side by side. But the days wove us tighter. Aayoka began teaching me pieces of her tongue-simple things: water, horse, fire, sky. I'd stumble, thick-mouthed, and she'd tilt her head, patient as stone, correcting me until I caught the shape. Her voice carried each word like it mattered where it landed. In return, I showed her my words: bridle, stirrup, lariat. She spoke them back, giving edges new music. It was a trade with no ledger, only laughter when I misstepped, only light in her eyes when she did. One afternoon, while I mended the south fence, she crouched close, fingers brushing mine as she steadied the wire. She said something soft I didn't understand. I asked her to say it again. She touched her chest, then mine. "Dakota," she said carefully, watching me. "It means friend, ally, strong." The name settled on me different than Luke ever had. My given name was a tool, a brand on a ledger. This one felt like a key slid into a lock. "Dakota," I repeated, tasting it. She nodded once, firm. "Yes, that is you." I carried it the rest of the day like a hidden flame. When I watered the horses, when I laid the rope back on its peg, the word followed me, heavier than iron, but lighter than breath. That night I lay awake longer than I meant, to listening to the house breathe around us. A new weight pressed at me, not burden, not dread, something closer to being seen. I hadn't realized how long I'd been a man. No one looked at twice, just another shape on the horizon. Now, with one word, she had called me out of hiding. The more I let it turn in me, the more it unsettled. If she saw more than I offered, if she named a self I hadn't known, what else might she uncover? Loneliness is a shield, hard and honest. Her naming cracked it without asking permission. But when morning came, and I stepped onto the porch with coffee in hand, she greeted me with that same patient nod, as if nothing had shifted. Only when she passed close enough to take the tin cup did she whisper, "Dakota," like it was already ours to keep, and I let it be. The storm rose sudden, as they do on the plains. One moment the sky was bruised but calm, the next it was tearing itself apart. The wind shoved at the rafters, and the horizon split white with lightning. Horses screamed in the corral, hooves drumming like war. We ran without speaking. Rain hit so hard it felt like stones. My hat tore loose. I let it go. Aayoka was already at the gate, rope in her hand, dark hair plastered to her face. She moved through the chaos like she'd rehearsed it. I followed, lungs burning, the gelding reared, eyes rolling white. I caught his halter, nearly bowled over by his weight. Aayoka a rope with a snap and caught the Mari's neck clean, pulling her steady with strength I hadn't known she carried. Together we forced them into the barn, shoving, hauling, every nerve lit with storm fire. The thunder landed on us like a hammer. Rain poured through every gap in the boards, turning the dirt floor to black mud. By the time the last horse stumbled inside, we were drenched, shaking, and pressed shoulder to shoulder in the dim light. Breathless, I turned to her. Her face was streaked with water, eyes flashing, chest heaving. She looked back at me, not as the stranger who had stood by my trough days ago, not as the woman who owed me some vow of family, but as equal. Partner. The silence after the storm's first fury was louder than the wind. Horses blew hard, stamping, but the space between us burned brighter. I wanted to say something, anything, to name what had been rising since that morning. She touched the rail with her woven knot, but words felt clumsy, too small for what was standing in the barn with us. So I didn't. We just looked at each other, both soaked, both shaking, both alive in a way that felt different from before. The storm roared, but it belonged outside now. And here there was only the thrum of hearts, and the heat where our arms brushed. I let the silence hold what I could not. And for once, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like the beginning of something too big for language. The land wore the storm's shadow for days after fence, posts leaning, puddles stubborn in the yard, the air sharp with wet earth. Yet inside me, the weight had shifted. Something unspoken hung between us, no longer fragile but certain, as if the storm had nailed it into place. We didn't need to talk about it. Our glances told enough. When she passed me a cup, her fingers brushed mine a second longer than necessary. When I came in from the corral, her eyes found me first, soft as dawn, steady as a gate that won't give in the wind. Nothing outward changed. I still rode fence lines, she still drew water, the horses still snorted when dusk fell. But the quiet we shared was no longer two silences stacked together. It was one, and I knew fear, again, not of death or hunger, but of her leaving. The ranch had carried me fine through years of solitude, yet now the thought of it emptying of her footsteps felt like the real ruin. One evening she tied another woven strip beside the first on the porch rail. I stood beside her, hat in hand, watching her knot it with the same patience as before. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I told you I am yours." Her voice was calm, but it reached straight through me. I wanted to ask if it was still about her brother, about debt, but I didn't, because in the way she said it I heard choice. So I laid my hand over hers on the rail, letting the knot rest beneath our palms. She didn't pull away. The wind sighed across the yard, lifting her braid, carrying the faintest hint of juniper. In that moment I knew what began at the creek wasn't mercy or obligation. It was fate bending two lives until they met, and it was love keeping them there. The porch boards creaked under our weight. The horizon burned its last red line, and I let the quiet speak for me. Tomorrow would come, the same chores, the same winged, but not the same man, not the same woman, not the same silence. We had traded solitude for family, and vows for something deeper. I turned to her, whispering her name once more, Aayoka, and she answered not with words, but with the stillness of someone who had already chosen.